A couple days ago, a story ran in The Athletic, pinned by Stuart Mandel, but reported on, I think, by a team of athletic writers. Headline being, five-star recruit in the class of 2023 signs an agreement with a collective that could pay him more than $8 million. As we've talked about these NIL collectives, and we've talked about, what the going rate would be, the way that these things are getting organized. I'm not going to, go and check out the story for yourself. We're not going to read it here. I don't want to undercut their business, but the big takeaways here is the way that it's being structured. And we do have a guess of who it might be, but to get things started, the way that it is set up, according to The Athletic, is that he will be paid, this five-star prospect will be paid $350,000 almost immediately from the collective, followed by monthly payouts escalating all the way to $2 million a year once he begins his college career, in exchange for making public appearances and taking part in social media promotions and other NIL activities, quote, on behalf of the collective or a third party. So again, we have gone from the expectation that, maybe this would be a one-time kind of payments, the idea that you would have an opportunity to come show up on campus and get linked up with the collective, get deals with local businesses. This is an $8 million deal where it could escalate to him already making millions per year by the time he's already in college. When you see these numbers, I immediately think it's a quarterback. I immediately think that the market is going to have a response to this. And I'm curious if this is where we're headed in terms of the way that these things are going to be structured from a contractual standpoint.
So are we not going to say the name? Or should we just give hints? Because I will say, I agree with you, Chip. For that kind of money, I'm going to assume it's a quarterback. And I'm going to assume it's a quarterback with a 5-star rating who has a lot of crystal ball predictions to Tennessee, who happens to reside in the state of California, where I believe it is legal for kids to be getting this money while they are still in high school. So, if you have a 24/7 Sports, if you can find 247sports.com and you want to find out who it is, not that hard to figure out.
You know what? I'll take a stab at it. 5-star quarterback Nico Iamaleava. Yeah,
there you go. Yep.
Nico Iamaleava. That's the best I got. DK, what'd you think?
We heard the money for Arch Manning was probably the guesstimate on that is like $10 million, right? Like that's kind of he'll be the first $10 million quarterback. I think it's a shock to a lot of people's systems, but I say get used to it. It's just, I think it's the market kind of setting itself. And I think it's important to note that it's spread over 3 years, so it kind of evens out a little bit. I think there's going to be some really interesting dynamics that take place. And you alluded to them, Chip. One, like you're not getting this all in one lump sum payment anymore. Like businesses, collectives, whoever's orchestrating these deals are starting to say, I'm sure they're looking at Quinn Ewers and being like, well, wait a second, that kid just took money and ran. We want to make sure that doesn't happen. So there's incentive not only to stay, but, not to transfer. I also wonder if there's any protection on these, like based on playing time. Like what if you don't start at all and you're just sitting on the bench? Like, I won't transfer. I'll just keep collecting checks. I do think you'll start to see more of these types of deals that'd be multi-year with incentives to stick around the program that brought you in there. And I want to say it'll come back down to reality, but and then I tell myself, no, these aren't rational, like thinking minds. These are crazy college football fans that pay $12 million, $17 million for coaches not to coach. And they do it routinely. Like, and those numbers keep going up. So what makes me think that all of a sudden for a quarterback, and guess what? There's no bidders in those markets. It's just, we got to get rid of this guy. Now you've got multiple bidders. So I think this is just the start of the new frontier. I do wonder the fan reaction. What do fans think of this? But I think this is the new world that we're living in college football, and people should just get used to it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. One of the things you talked about that is going to be interesting to me is like kind of what you said, like the guarantees. Like if he leaves Tennessee, does that stop? Are there certain parameters of how much he has to play for the money to come in? And it's also like, what kind of leverage are the schools going to have? Because like if it's compared, just say Tennessee to Alabama, this isn't a knock on Tennessee, but we know where the two are as far as their footing in the SEC and the national landscape right now. Like maybe Alabama could say to a kid, he's like, well, no, it's going to depend on whether you start. We're not just going to give it to you. If you want to come play for Alabama, we will give this to you, but you've got to earn the job. Whereas Tennessee, the player might just be like, no, just come here. As long as you come here, we'll get you this money. And if you leave, then fine, it stops. But until that, it doesn't matter whether you win the job or not. So it'll be interesting to see the kind of leverage the schools have. And as you mentioned, like they're already kind of learning from what happened with Quinn Ewers going to Ohio State and then transferring out. And it's going to be interesting to see, like, this is where the money is now. Is it going to be the same kind of money in 4 or 5 years when we're seeing that these kids maybe are getting, they're not really getting the return for the buck that many of these people are anticipating now, that there really are no kind of parameters or like a salary cap of any sort as to what you can give a guy. And people are just throwing the money around like crazy. Cause like it is insane to think that Arch Manning's probably going to get 10 million before he leaves college. And this kid is going to get 8 million before he leaves college. And it's like, is it really worth it? Like if you're Tennessee, is his career really going to be worth 8 million to you without any other players around him?
I don't have any answer to that because I don't understand what 8 million looks like compared to, like, we need to see bad investments before because right now we're just still in the point where we are only seeing the athletes that are getting it. And I guess Quinn Ewers might fall into that category, or at least he's the first high profile one that we can mention.
I'll give you some.
Okay.
How about DJ Uiagalelei and Spencer Rattler? Like I would say those are bad investments because the play didn't translate. Like these are and we see it like, again, it is very similar to the NFL and the draft. And we see busts that are paid all the time, first round picks that are paid 20, 25 million and they're out of the league in a few years. So I think it'll be the same. The market will figure itself out and some team will find a Johnny Manziel type player. And then that's what everybody's going to look for. Because look at what Johnny Manziel did to A&M. Look at what Joe Burrow did for LSU. Like it is the one position where you can envision, man, that's all we're missing is a game-changing quarterback. And yet, I don't know if that's all these programs are missing. Like, I don't know whoever came in right away in 1 year could win Tennessee a national championship. Could they help them, get 10-2? Or could they be like an Ole Miss in the East and, have a really successful season? Yeah. But, and then that maybe propels them into that conversation where 1 year and they're kind of in that mix, maybe that gets them to the next level and then they can support that quarterback that they paid all that money to. I mean, remember in the article that David Ubben wrote, they said the collective said we need a war chest of 25 million. So you do them, and that was over multiple years. Start doing the math. You're like, all right, that's not only 8 million for a quarterback, that's spread out the rest, and that goes to an entire roster. So it's fascinating to me, these numbers that are getting thrown around.
How much involvement would you want between the NIL collective and your university or your coaching staff? Do you think you would rather let the boosters run wild and just sort of be writing up these contracts, or would you try to maintain some sort of say? I mean, even if only for the opportunity to understand what's going on, with these players and what's going on with them and the third party, the collective, how those numbers and how those contracts stack up against each other, what that's going to do to your recruiting efforts as you're trying to maybe get somebody else at a similar position. It seems like you could buy more players with less oversight, but then you could also find yourself in a whole heap of trouble in terms of,
roster management,
the people side of this.
Yes.
I mean, look at the role that Barton has with Vanderbilt, where he's the quote unquote general manager. I think you could see programs in the very near future have we have recruiting coordinators, we have all that stuff, but I think you're probably going to see positions created in the near future that are kind of like in charge of the NIL stuff, trying to figure out who's getting what and kind of budgeting it. Because first of all, if you're like the head coach, you really don't want this on your plate. Like you've got enough to deal with. That's not to say that you don't want to have like a say in what's going on and being aware of what's going on, but you also don't want to be the one person in charge. So there's got to be some kind of happy medium between the coaching staff being fully aware of what's happening, but also just having people who are tasked with figuring this out and figuring out who's getting what and how much. Because I don't think you want to just let boosters go Wild West, because that's going to lead to a whole bunch of problems that just show up on your plate where it's all of a sudden it's like, how can you not play me? I'm getting this much money. I'm getting twice as much money as this guy. Why is he starting over me? And then the coach is like, what the hell are you talking about? I had nothing to do with that.
Oh my gosh, if NIL payments are tied to playing time and now all of a sudden coaches'
Yeah.
decisions and game planning get in the middle of that, that sounds awful.
Or what about the pressure that comes from, let's say, I don't even know. So this kid will be on campus next year or no? He's a 23, so he's not there.
Yeah.
Well, let's say somebody else, let's say Hendon Hooker doesn't leave, he comes back and he's playing okay. Like, and this kid's on campus. And the collective is like, oh, that's our guy. We want him playing now. So they could be pressuring coaching staffs to start playing the player. You know, like it just becomes a really, really weird dynamic that we're throwing into an already pretty volatile sport, you know, as far as fan interaction and the craziness and passion, where there's going to be a lot of more influences. And I think the position that Barton has, and he was one of the first, you're seeing a lot more of those crop up. But what's interesting is remember, this is not supposed to be about recruiting. This isn't supposed to be for pay for play, remember? So how do they do that? And does your general manager, because every room, you know, every school has a board up and where their roster is, and it's a 2 or 3 man depth chart. And it's all right, these are the positions we need. This is the expended, these are the guys, we don't know if we love them. We could replace this guy. So how do you go to from your general manager to your collective or business or wherever it is?
I've got your answer.
What is it?
It's former athletic department employees are playing this role. So the way that Georgia has got it set up is the CEO of the collective is somebody who just until last year worked in the Georgia athletic department. Mm-hmm. And the director of operations is a former walk-on football player. It's that thing where people leave a bank and then they go to the lobby, or they leave the government and then they go to the lobbying firm, and it's because they've worked on both sides of it. Yep. And so what you're doing is you get former players who don't go to the NFL and former athletic department employees. When they step out of those university roles as administrator and player, they can then go and join the collective where they help facilitate the conversation between the school and the NIL collective to be able to make all that work.
Here's another scenario too to consider. Let's say that we were talking about, the kid gets an NIL deal. He's getting like a $500,000 a year, $1 million a year, whatever he wants it to be. But it's contingent on him being on the team and him getting a certain amount of playing time. But this is a kid who now he's a junior and he hasn't really lived up to the hype of when you signed him out of high school. And now, Dave, like you said, all these teams have their boards of what they have. And there's guys on there that maybe, like we see every year, every program, like some kids get told, hey, hit the bricks. Maybe not so, but it's just like you're better off leaving because you're not going to be playing here. But now let's say a coach is sitting here with a decision where there's this high schooler he likes that he thinks is going to be better for the team overall than this third stringer at this one position. But that third stringer is also getting $500,000 just to be on the roster. So now the coach has to figure out, geez, do I want to cut this kid, basically take away his scholarship and $500,000 for him for this kid? Because now you've got that kind of an ethical thing where it's like it's just those kind of decisions are going to be on the plates here soon. And it's like, I'm happy I don't have to make.
Someone's going to step in. And I don't think that it needs to happen. I don't think that I'm not, torn up by this myself, but it's nuts, right? I mean, there's got to be some adjustment to the world where we're at before, I don't know.
There needs to be some kind of guideline. But
there's no one wants to do it.
Yeah, I know.
So everyone's like looking around like, yeah, we need guidelines, and no one's stepping up.
Mm-hmm. I'll do it.
Yeah.
Just give me a month. I'll come up with some. No, but I'm just going to come up with the rules, and then everybody has to follow them, whatever I decide.
Yeah, because
I'm sure they'll all just fall lockstep and just follow them.
What was the dirty secret that Bud gave away last week? Everything just comes down to whether or not players are compensated. Like, we allow the Wild Wild West because we also don't want to have this other conversation, or we're not yet ready to have this other conversation. So the way that we're able to keep the ball rolling on player empowerment is we're going to empower them to milk boosters for millions and millions of dollars with very little, no oversight or regulation. Mm-hmm. Incredible stuff.